One comes to a point in life where the choices that seem to yield the most are not always the best. Colin Montgomery has to choose between his job, which leads him to a life of riches and acknowledgement, or a life with the one he loves, where he can have peace of mind and happiness. In the opening scene of Flying Home, we see Colin Montgomery on an airplane, who is quietly listening as Mr. Jason Walden struggles to seal an important deal with Mr. Carradines. Seeing that Jason is going nowhere with the deal and is about to lose Mr. Carradines, Colin stealthily removes Jason from his seat with the excuse that his wife is calling, and takes over the deal as their journey continues. It's night, and Colin finally arrives home with the woman. He's about to engage in intimacy with her when a call from Mr. Carradines interrupts his night. Colin, who cares more about work, ignores the girl, and she angrily walks out. The next day, at work, Colin's boss congratulates him for a job well done and gives him another difficult client, Sheikh Abdullah Naid. He gives an excited Colin an update on the work, telling him to take over and get the man on board. Immediately, Colin makes his way to the desert where the Sheikh's residence is. After waiting for some time, he's finally given an audience, and makes his way to the cellar where the Sheikh spends time with his beloved pigeons. There, the Sheikh rants about his birds, and how they bring out the best in him. He also expresses his intention of not signing up with their company. Feeling the pressure, Colin quickly compliments the birds, trying to get on his good side. Colin probes more about the pigeons, and this gets the Sheikh talking about the Barcelona tournament. The tournament is the biggest tournament for birds, and it has always been his dream to participate in it and win, but he lacks the right bird. Seeing an opening, and not wanting to lose the opportunity, Colin quickly asks where he can get the right bird from. The Sheikh tells him about Jos Pauwels, a stubborn man from Flanders, Belgium, where Colin's great-grandfather was shot in the war. Jos refuses to sell the bird for any amount. We'll later get to find out why. Determined to prove himself and his company WFG, Colin asks the Sheikh for the favor of trusting him to get the bird he so much wants. The Sheikh, who's close to signing with another company, Horizon, doesn't believe he can do it, but accepts after seeing his determination. In the next scene, Colin is in an airplane, searching for more about Mr. Pauwels on his way to Belgium. He finds out more about him, and even gets to know about his granddaughter who stays in his house. Seeing this, he already has his game plan mapped out. He will use the excuse of searching for his ancestors' grave to achieve his goal. Arriving at his destination, Colin is welcomed by the assistant, who has provided everything he needs for his stay in Belgium. He apologizes for his accommodation, as he couldn't find a hotel, and had to rent a room in a chapel instead. But Colin, who wants a conspicuous and modest life, finds everything perfect, including his modest car. Colin heads to the church, but the ride is quite dull. The road he's meant to take is blocked, so he goes down the dirt road, but his car gets stuck in a puddle of water. He's frustrated, as he has no choice but to trek to the church. The weather doesn't help matters, and by the time he reaches the church, he's soaked. The priest welcomes him with a warm smile, happy that he gets the honor of housing an American. The priest is even more excited that Colin has come to find the bones of his ancestor, as he's been told. He shows Colin his room, apologizing for its current state, as he only tried to make it look more modern for his stay. Colin quietly accepts everything, but grows tired of the priest chatting, making the atmosphere quite awkward. Finally, the priest informs him about dinner time and introduces Martha, his cook, who Colin spots through the window later on. The atmosphere at dinner is similarly awkward as they engage in a discussion about his ancestors and the location of Flanders. Colin is not so happy about the fact that there's no Wi-Fi. After dinner, he goes to bed, waiting for what the next day has in store for him. The next day, Colin meets Martha, who's ready to make him breakfast, when he comes out of his room. She informs him that the priest has gone to mass and begins to prepare some eggs. As she's cooking, Colin asks her questions about the lifestyle of the Flanders people, looking for what to engage in since there's no internet, but she comes up with basically nothing but TV and football. He asks if there's a pub. Fortunately for him, there's one 3 kilometers away in De Zevelput. After his bountiful meal, courtesy of Martha, Colin heads to the pub and finds only 2 people there. A grumpy man who's drinking way too early in the morning, and a young bartender. The bartender introduces herself as Isabella, and when Colin introduces himself, she already knows him, as he's the latest topic in town, even though he just arrived the day before. Colin is a little surprised by this, and Isabella informs him that it's easy to become popular in Bunderzell. When the drinking man chips in, Colin is taken aback, as he thought the man didn't understand English, since he didn't respond to him when he was greeted earlier. But it turns out he just doesn't like Americans, as he was once Isabella's English teacher. Noticing the interesting style of the pool in the pub, Colin comments on it, and Isabella asks him to try it when he says he's good at pool. She teaches him the rules of Belgian pool, but as they're about to start the game, Pierre, Isabella's ex-teacher, asks them to bet. Isabelle wants to leave it, but Colin takes it up, wanting to fit in, and bets that anytime he loses, he'll buy Pierre a drink. Pierre asks that he join him in drinking, and Colin is reluctant, but gives in when Pierre edges him on. Colin and Isabelle engage in a conversation as they play, getting to know more about each other. Isabelle reveals that she works only during the summer, as she's still a student. Meanwhile, Colin claims he's a high school teacher and has all summer to find his ancestor's grave. Isabel is impressed, and even more so when he informs her of how family ties and finding his heritage are important to him. Isabel wins, and they go for a rematch. By the time Colin raises his head, Isabel, who drove him in his drunken state from the pub, is already at his lodge. She offers to take him up, but promises her he can go up by himself, and also tells her to keep his car when she hands him his keys. After confirming that she's still going to help him find the grave, he gets down from the car, about to go to his room, and she advises him to drink lots of water. Later, Colin wakes up hungover to the sound of chickens in his ears. Before he goes out, Martha prepares a drink of what looks like raw egg and coffee to clear his hangover, and encourages Colin, who's cautious, to drink it. He joins Isabel in the car outside and surprisingly feels better. In the car, they decide to start with the largest cemetery to find his ancestor, as there are about 100 others to look through. Arriving at the cemetery, they go through it and take a lunch break after a while, enjoying their French fries with mayonnaise. Colin is impressed with the place and is reminded of his hometown in New York. Entering the mood, he keeps talking, telling Isabel about the strain he has in his relationship with his father. But this confuses Isabel, as just a while ago, he mentioned that family ties were important to him. Noticing the slip-up, Colin quickly tries to cover it up, but is saved by Isabel, who remembers that she has to join her grandfather at the Pigeon Club. Colin expresses his interest, and seeing this, Isabel takes him along. At the club, Isabel's granddad Joss is happy to see her, and when he sees Colin beside her, he's wary. When the old man acknowledges him, Colin starts a conversation, which almost leads to an interrogation, but Joss is called, as he needs to send his pigeons off on a journey. After he leaves, Isabel talks more about racing pigeons to Colin, explaining that the birds are to be shipped to Amen, a town in France, where they'll start the race, and the first bird back home wins. The place goes silent as Joss picks Whittacup, his favorite bird, checking if it's alright before its journey. After Joss is done, the place's atmosphere goes back to normal, and he goes to meet his daughter. Joss is not happy that Colin is showing interest in the sport, but Isabel ignores him. She invites Colin to their loft the next day, where they'll sit and wait for Whittacup to return. Joss tries to discourage him, saying it would be boring, but Colin happily accepts the invitation. As Colin and Isabel head to the car, she promises him that her grandfather, who Colin believes hates his guts, will warm up to him as time goes on. Next up, Isabel drives Colin to a beautiful nature spot near her house, the Clapeyton, so he can see more of the country. Isabel expresses her love for her town, where she's been all her life, even after the demise of her father. She doesn't want anything to destroy the beauty of the place. She is glad that the last company that came to put up a building there ran out of finances, and this sends Colin speechless. After freshening up in his lodge, he gets a call from David, his assistant, who gives him information about the company. Colin orders him to set up a meeting with the CEO the next day and book a flight to New York for him. In the next scene, Colin and Isabel are in Joss's house, and Isabel invites him to a party that will be going on that night. Colin, who has been studying the pictures in the house, asks about the man in the picture with Joss and discovers that it is her father. Isabel informs him about how the Barcelona tournament was also their dream, but it came crashing down when her father passed 3 years ago. The air is tense, but Colin breaks it by asking about Joss's whereabouts. Immediately, Colin goes to find Joss, who's in his loft. Joss is calm upon seeing him this time. He calmly introduces Colin to a world of pigeons, giving him one to carry, and even allowing him to name a newborn pigeon. Colin is surprisingly excited and enjoying himself, and as they are chatting, Whittacup arrives home. Urged by Colin, they quickly go to the club to see if Whittacup was the first. Instead, they discover that Joss's friend, Marcel, lost the pigeons that he raised his whole life the previous night. Sad for his friend's loss, Joss hugs him as a form of comfort. Later that evening, Colin is seen getting ready from a hotel in Bruges. He heads to Boulard Envy, the company that he has an appointment with, and meets with Mr. Boulard. After a long day, Colin is freshening up when Martha informs him that she's going to the party. She asks him to let the priest know if he sees him. She also urges him to come, but he says he's not going. Afterward, he tries to go to sleep, but it doesn't come. Meanwhile, at the party, Isabel is having fun dancing, but is still checking the door to see if Colin is going to show up. Immediately he comes through the door, and Isabel goes over to him. She's happy that he came, even though he sarcastically says he wouldn't miss the best party in Bunderzell. Isabel drags him to the dance floor, and they have fun dancing. After dancing to the fast beat, the song changes to a slow dance, and Isabel rests on him while they dance, taking him aback. The dance ends, and the host of the party comes up, thanking the guests for coming in their numbers. He talks about the next dance, the kissing dance, which his friend requested. The dance begins, and Martha picks Colin to be her first partner. She kisses his cheeks as they dance, and tells him to pick a girl. As Colin is about to pick Isabel to be his next partner, he is pushed off by another guy, who picks her instead and starts kissing her immediately. Enraged, Colin punches him. A fight starts while everyone tries to separate them. Isabel stops the car in front of the priest's house as Colin is putting ice on his face in the car. She is worried about him, but he assures her that he is all right. Colin then daringly tells her that he was about to pick her up before the other guy did, and she tells him to kiss her. As they kiss, Martha, who the priest was trying to help into the house, sees them and teases them. They laugh, seeing the state she's in. Isabel asks Colin out, and he gladly accepts, kissing her again. The next morning, Colin wakes up to a call from his boss, who informs him that the sheikh has moved the deal up to $2 million, and that he should be back home with his mission completed by that evening. Colin, who is in shock after the call ends, curses out, wondering where everything went wrong. Colin, dressed up in his suit, arrives at Joss's house. Seeing that he's not home, he goes to the loft, where he finds Joss taking care of Speed, the bird that Colin named. Joss starts engaging in small conversation, but Colin tells him that he's here for business, revealing that he's working for the sheikh. However, Joss refuses to budge about selling Whittacup. This doesn't shake Colin, who already knew that Joss would refuse. Instead, he threatens Joss that his company will help the Boulert Construction Company in Bruges with the necessary financial resources to carry out the project on the nature spot behind Isabel's house. Joss is disappointed and surprised that it's the same Colin that danced with them before. Wanting to be sure, he asks if he knows what the Clapeyton means to Isabel. He realizes instead that Colin took advantage of Isabel, his weakness, to get him to sell his bird, and he gives in, accepting the money he was so adamant about not collecting before. Ashamed, he asks Colin not to let anyone know. And Colin, being the businessman he is, agrees. He arranges for Whittacup to be picked up later, when Isabel's gone. Joss is deeply disappointed in Colin, and even tells him to get out when Colin brings up money. Colin hands him his business card, and Joss finds out his real name is Colin Montgomery. Alone, he grieves the loss of his favorite pigeon, Whittacup. At the airport, Colin has finished checking all his papers, and is about to get on the plane when the attendant stops him, as his phone is ringing. Checking the phone, he sees it's Isabel, and ignores it after staring for a long time. On his flight home, he keeps staring into space, not happy, even though he got the deal as planned. In the next scene, Colin is in his room, distraught, as he stares at Isabel's photo. The girl he just had sex with bids him a goodnight, wanting to meet again, but he absent-mindedly answers her. In the next scene, Colin is playing tennis with his assistant David, who doesn't seem to understand that he's not in a good mood. He keeps trying to talk about work, and ends up getting hit by Colin's frustrated and angry self. Colin arrives home, and is happy to receive a warm welcome from his mom. They head to the dining table, where they have lunch. Making small talk, Colin's mom tries to catch up with him, asking him how New York has been, and if he met any girls, but Colin's dad doesn't seem too happy with it, as he just wants his son to focus on work. Colin talks about Isabel, even though he doesn't mention her name, and explains that things got complicated. This seems to trigger his dad, who goes off, and the two have a heated argument. The debate ends when Colin walks out of the dining room, after his father insinuates that being able to earn money is what matters the most. This makes Colin's father regret his actions. After changing and settling down, Colin is in the attic going through old pictures when his father finds him. He sits beside him and starts going through the pictures with him. His father reminisces about old times when he sees a picture of himself with his wife's best friend. As they continue going through the pictures, Colin finds an old letter in one of his great-grandfather's pictures, the one who lost his life in Flanders. With the go-ahead from his dad, Colin reads the letter, and the words regarding speak deeply to both of them, healing the rift as his father finally confesses that he loves him. In the next scene, Colin is seen on a plane once again. And not long later, he is at the dining table with the priest and Martha. The priest is glad that he could find a picture of his great-grandfather, and that he knows someone who can help him. Colin apologizes for going without a warning, using the excuse of his father being sick. He gets their sympathy in the process. The talk shifts to Joss, who's sad about his loss of Whittacup, and the news picks at Colin's conscience. That night, Colin goes to the pub in Disavelput to talk to Isabel. On entering, he meets Pierre, who brings out a mop stick instead to drive him away. Before Pierre can beat Colin up, Isabel comes out, but also drives Colin out. Even though he begs for just a minute, Colin goes, but promises to keep coming back. In his room in the priest's house, Colin sets up the bed he didn't set the last time he was there and sits down, sad and discouraged. The next day, Colin goes to Joss's house. He finds Joss in his loft, taking care of Speed, who has fully grown and is ready for racing. Joss asks why he's there, and Colin confesses that he wants Isabel to know who he truly is, but Joss tells him to get his bird back before he does anything. Joss's condition doesn't help matters, as Colin believes that he can't do it. He tries to explain to Joss that it's impossible, as rich people don't like giving back what they've gotten, and that he'll lose his job. But Joss just tells him to get out, and never go near his granddaughter again. Colin is seated at the dining table, staring into space, when Martha brings his food. He begs her to sit with him, and Martha, who noticed he is sad, does so. They get into a conversation about Joss, and Martha explains to a confused Colin why Whittacup is not just a pigeon. She explains that Whittacup is the first bird who came out after the demise of Tony, Joss's son. Everyone is reminded of Tony whenever it flies, and also aware of the love that Joss has for the bird. It appears Colin has taken away a significant part of their lives, in a bid to do his job by all possible means. In the next scene, Whittacup is seen taking off at the start of the Barcelona tournament. Back in Flanders, Isabelle is having lunch with her grandfather, and she tells him about Colin, who has come back, and even went to find her at the pub in De Zevelbut. Seeing how determined Colin is, the state his granddaughter is in, and not wanting the news to come from another person, Joss breaks the news of who Colin is, and how he sold Whittacup. The news breaks Isabelle's heart, and her grandfather comforts her. Colin heads on a journey to Euskirchen, where he tracks down the sheikh. He meets the sheikh relaxing outside with the person who tends to his European pigeon. He is introduced as Mr. Conrad by the sheikh, who's happy to see him again. Alone, Colin nervously tries to get the sheikh to reconsider Whittacup, and the sheikh catches on immediately, adamantly stating that the bird stays with him till its life is over. The sheikh happily welcomes Colin to stay the night in his home, ignoring what he earlier suggested. In the next scene, the priest is excitedly looking for Colin. Isabelle, who is finding it hard to concentrate on her reading, informs him that Colin isn't around. The priest shows her what he discovered about Colin's great-grandfather. He has discovered that Colin's great-grandfather was a pigeoneer. Meanwhile, Whittacup, which has started its journey since the takeoff, is still on its way home. In the sheikh's house at night, a restless Colin sneaks into his loft in search of Whittacup. The alarm goes off, and when Mr. Conrad rushes there, he demands to see the sheikh. When the sheikh comes to see him, Colin puts aside his shame and confesses that he threatened Joss to sell Whittacup, and demands that the bird be given to its rightful owner. Annoyed, the sheikh asks if Mr. Walden knew about it. When Colin continues to rant, he kicks him out of his estate. Losing hope, Colin drives to the nature spot near Isabelle's house, while Whittacup rests for the night. Meanwhile, Isabelle finds it hard to sleep. The next morning, back in the priest's house, Colin is packing up and getting ready to leave for New York when the priest stops him. He tells him that he might know where his great-grandfather was buried. This surprises Colin, making the priest narrate the famous story of Sher Ami, the war pigeon that saved the life of the British Army. The priest is convinced that Colin's great-grandfather is buried at the statue of Sher Ami. It's early in the morning, and Isabelle is watering the plants in her grandfather's house when the sound of a helicopter distracts her. She is shocked to see a strange man looking for her grandfather. It happens to be the sheikh. Inside, Isabelle serves the sheikh tea, even though they are hostile towards him. The sheikh notices the hostile atmosphere as he mentions Colin, especially Isabelle, who feels hurt by Colin's betrayal. He goes ahead to clarify that Colin came to plead with him to return Whittacup, and that he even threw him out of the estate the day before. Isabelle looks relieved at Colin's change of heart, and her grandfather is shocked. The sheikh feels the love he has for the family, and Joss believes that it's because of his granddaughter. He urges her to go look for Colin. Isabelle goes to the priest's house, but he informs her that Colin has already left for the airport, and is probably on his way to New York. She's relieved when he says that he informed him of the cemetery his great-grandfather is likely to be buried in. She quickly asks for directions to the cemetery. With the help of the priest Spike, Isabelle drives speedily to the cemetery. Meanwhile, Whittacup is still on his journey home. As Isabella reaches the cemetery, she runs to where Colin is seated in front of his great-grandfather's grave. At the same time, Whittacup also reaches Joss's loft, shocking both Joss and the sheikh, who are both in the loft. Seeing her, Colin stands up, but is ashamed to face her when she sees the name Montgomery on his great-grandfather's grave. He thinks she doesn't know yet, and tries to tell her that he isn't a straightforward person, as she thought. But a smiling Isabelle is convinced that he is, and kisses him. At the loft, Joss is emotional and happy that Whittacup came back. Both Joss and the sheikh are impressed that Whittacup is back early, but it, unfortunately, went to the wrong loft, and will be disqualified. The sheikh, happy about the outcome, proposes a partnership with Joss, and Joss happily accepts. In the last scene, Colin and Isabelle are holding each other in front of his great-grandfather's grave. At last, he has found a reason beyond just living for work. He has found family and love in the line of duty, making him realize that indeed, just like the words of his great-grandfather's letter, being with your loved ones matters the most. Above all else, it gives meaning to life.